Right.
promise to pay.
Well, they could sign loans.
Yeah.
They could, if they could sign any contract, they
It's
could
like being a
sign.
board member, right? For an organization,
This
you
is
take
a-
on the legal.
Yeah, we understand this is a bigger question than research.
No, unfortunately, when lawyers sit in front of you, there's just no easy answers. So
Yeah.
they're like, yes, and there's just no, like, you don't get to do that, unfortunately.
I mean, maybe if you set it up where there was like someone who was over 18 who was like the point person, I don't know whether they're not in a co-op or not, I don't know, but they, under them, or there is this co-op with this understanding that whatever the co-op tells this 18 plus person to do, they'll do it. I mean, they'll have to use some of their discretion because they're ultimately liable,
Right.
but maybe you work out that relationship with someone.
Oh, that's interesting. Like a parent
Single sole
corporation.
member, yeah, or some kind of subsidiary, something that's like that. And you have an agreement with that person, even though the youth can avoid that agreement, there's still that trust that that's not the intention, isn't to do it. But that risk is on that person if they're okay with it.
I think they can shield themselves from liability with other forms of entity. Yeah, so that's an option.
Thanks. Okay, else. Yeah, does anybody else have any other questions for them?
How about the question on your paper regarding to being an employee or a contractor at the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You mean like during the probationary period or in general?
Yeah, in general.
In general? So are people largely familiar with the distinction employees versus independent contractors? So there's several different laws treat it, the question differently, although they're really centers around control. So how much control or right to control does someone have over the work that you're doing? And if that answer is someone's controlling my work, they're telling me what to do, they're providing the supplies and the tools and the training and really guiding that looks more like an employee. But if they don't have the right to control your work, you show up, you're kind of providing your own tools and sort of in business for yourself, and you've got all these other things going on, that's more independent contractor. Sometimes what we're looking at with worker co-ops is, are they an employee or are they an owner, right? So an owner is just the opposite of whatever the employee. If you're not an employee, then you could make the argument that you're an owner. So it's a control again. So if we're sharing, if no one's controlling my work, but the co-op is democratically one person, one vote, we're making all of the decisions in terms of the hiring, the firing, how we're doing everything. There's a strong case that no one person is an employee, that you're an owner of the co-op, like a partner or a worker owner.
So owners can an owner be a contractor?
Yes.
Because if the owner does not want to be paid, if they are like 2 or 3, they don't want to be paid at the beginning because they don't have enough resources, financial resources at the beginning, can they be just work as a contractor, and then when they grow, they can now start being paid, something like that?
So the answer really depends on what kind of work they're doing. So just because there aren't resources in the business, there's 2 ways to answer this. One is, you can't just tell someone, I need you to clean and sweep these floors once a week or twice a week. We can't pay you right now because we're just starting out. That's largely, if you're really controlling the work that they're doing in the government, we're to say that's an employee, there are very specific rules around that. You can't defer to pay them later. But if that person is a part owner, they have an ownership interest in the business, there's no money there, and you're all building it up together, that's something called sweat equity, which is like from your hard work, is that you're getting that share. That's looked at more favorably. Because you have that ownership, you're working towards it, you're not an employee.
So if you like put that from the beginning in your bylaws and
yourself that 6 months you're gonna do, half of your work is gonna be paid and half of your work is gonna be your sweat equity and it's gonna be equal to this amount. If you put it that way, you're protecting yourself.
So long as that person has an ownership interest. So this is the tricky part with the probationary period where they don't have an ownership stake yet. You have them coming to meetings, you have them doing some work in the office, that is what you're telling them to do. It's largely administrative, it's not, it's very much controlled. It's risky, that's risky if they're not getting paid for that, because it's not as though they have an ownership share. They might not ever get an ownership share. The way this comes up, and it's happened with one of the co-ops I worked with, the co-op didn't want to be part of the co-op that had gone through this training probationary period, come to the meetings for 3-4 months. She went to the Department of Labor, or the State Department of Labor, and said, I was an employee, these were all the hours that I worked, I went to all these trainings, these cleanings, they should pay me. So we had to respond and explain, it was co-op and all this stuff, but you don't want to, it's, the best way is just to make sure they're getting something that's at least above minimum wage, so they don't have a claim at the end of the day because they were compensated for that. And then maybe your membership fee is higher because then you can get the money back or something like that.
So, are potentially all internships or apprentices that don't identify as owners that aren't getting paid minimum wage, they potentially sue the business they're working for?
Well, you said internship?
Or internships or apprenticeships fall under the category?
So internship, do you mean like someone who's getting school credit or?
So then that's different.
That's different, that's treated differently.
There's a whole set of rules that deal with internships that are different.
But they have to be getting some other kind of criteria or some kind of compensation.
Yeah.
If it's just an internship of their own desire, their internship doesn't qualify as a big internship.
If they're just doing the work, you're
Right.
not paying them because they
Right.
think they're gonna become an owner.
Well, what if they? So they have to think that they're becoming an owner.
They have to have an ownership. For sweat equity, you have an ownership stake already.
But if it's like, I want to learn from you guys, then they're a volunteer, right? You
But
can mistreat volunteers any way you want.
Yeah.
There's some issues with volunteers with for-profit.
Could we
And
call
you
it
get,
that?
the issue is that a lot of the for-profits, with some exceptions, you generally can't have volunteers for for-profit organizations.
Co-ops?
Well, if your co-op is a for-profit organization, the benefit of the co-op is going to individuals and individual members, that's a for-profit, and you might have issues, like I said, there's exceptions, and I don't wanna say this as if it's a general rule, but there's an issue with having volunteers for for-profit entities, like some co-ops.
Protecting, I mean, you can see where it's coming from. Protect people getting exploited.
I have a question about the sweat equity. So if someone comes into a co-op, say like our membership fee for joining as an owner is like $1,000, and someone comes in with an interest in ownership or membership, and they're in this probationary period, is it possible to compensate people with equity, I guess, that's going towards that membership fee? Like saying every time you work, it's $8 towards your $1,000 membership fee, and then if someone were to not become an owner, they get that back in money.
So if the law is clear, the Fair Labor Standard Act, the wage and hour laws about when you have to pay someone, I think I forgot the exact terms, but it has to be within 2 weeks or whatever it is.
So that would make that
It could be.
And I think what you can do, because that's what we used to do to protect ourselves in the co-op, is that I will pay you and you will put that money back to in your account, and your savings
Yeah, you could do it that
account
way.
as towards your membership.
So it's not a negative, it's a positive.
Right,
Yeah,
so for example, you work 2 hours today, and at the end of the week, you get $16, right? If you pay $8 an hour. And then I take those $16, sign my check back, and put it back in the account as contribution to my work.
And
So
then
that
if
way
you-
you pay that person, and that person pay you back as part of.
And if you don't become a co-op owner,
If you don't become a co-op owner after a certain period of time,
you get it back.
Or you could pay them minimum wage, and whatever is above minimum wage could be building into equity. Is that a legal way to do it?
You could could set it up, you just wanna make sure that at the end of the day,
They get paid.
they're at least getting minimum wage, so they don't have a claim to say, I get.
I mean, if you don't become a member, you should definitely.
So if we have two classes of shares, voting shares and non-voting shares, and we have people who are just working sort of as independent subcontractors, but maybe they have some interest in, the mission of the co-op, could we give them shares in exchange, and then maybe because of the 2-week statute, maybe give them a certificate of share, written out, this is your written share in
And
our
when you
co-op.
get exchange, where you get.
In exchange for
What's the
work.
pay them
Well,
So if we don't pay
share
them,
time.
we give them a share of the co-op?
Well, we have we have two classes of shares. There's voting shares and non-voting shares. So there's, I guess, inherent benefits to having any share in the co-op. It's like equity, right? So that would be the benefit.
So is that going towards a patronage, the way that you're kind of.
Well, non-voting shares are mostly people who maybe would want to invest in us or something, and eventually get that money back if they wanted. But this is a way of people working.
I think if they're, okay, so if you have people that are I don't know if you guys know this. My understanding is that you have people that are classified, you can have people that are classified as owners that then can't vote, and if their only income is patronage refund, then they don't need to get paid minimum wage because they're technically owners, even if they don't have the full voting rights of until they've I don't know, been working there a certain amount of time.
Yeah, that's kind of what this question hinges on. I don't know what the law says about, can you kind of create a class of membership where someone's a member, or you're saying it's what equity, but really they don't have a say in it. I don't know, we'd have to look at whether you could try to do that. That's kind of what you're.
Yeah, I don't know.
So the idea
That's different.
we wouldn't pay them, we wouldn't have to have cash to get the work. We would give them a share in our very profitable
But you're saying a
I was
non-voting
saying something
share,
different.
you're giving
than
them,
this,
I thought you're saying we would give them a non-voting share.
Yeah.
Right, and that, my answer is I don't know if that's okay, if a non-voting share counts as ownership
Right.
for the purposes of sweat equity, not having to pay them.
Right.
I think that totally would not be a worker co-op. If
It
you
would-
have,
yeah.
it would be like a hybrid if you have non-voting members and voting members.
You're allowed to have non-voting members because they don't vote. That's why it's still a co-op, right? If they did vote, then
Are you talking about the equal exchange model where they have people who are basically have weird stocks but they don't vote? Are you talking about that?
yeah, kind of like that. Within Power, we had two classes and it went through a lawyer. And
Those people don't work.
it was a Class A share and a Class B share.
Yeah,
Was
but
the
those
difference.
own Class B share don't work at equal
Right,
exchange.
that's not.
That's the
question.
They're outside investors.
But I
Yeah, outside investors.
But I think the question is
Yeah.
whether or not you can work
Right.
for your investment. I
Right.
think the question is
Yeah,
can
it's
you
working it off, and
in-
it wouldn't be people going to be owners. It'd
Yeah.
just be
I think the answer
So
is.
could you compensate somebody with a Class
With the
B
B, yeah.
non-voting share?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
It sounds like the answer is the thing where you get paid and then you throw the money back in and then it goes towards your.
Non-voting.
Yeah, if there's a agreement, I don't know, maybe, can you make an agreement that with people that you get paid and then you buy non-voting stock with your wages? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so what is the person getting out of it? Just the hope that
Well,
they'll get money
Well,
back?
Yeah,
the agreement is that at
Yeah.
some point it turns into voting stock. I don't
But
know,
that
after
that
6
just
months or
opened the
something.
whole thing of opening a share
Or
public
account.
share
Different
laws
class.
and classification.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you're serious about it, let me know. We can
Yeah.
look into it.
Yeah, I
So,
mean,
we
I guess the
like-
question, why would you want to do that?
Well, I was just thinking of ways that we could legally have volunteers, because we do sometimes have volunteers.
have volunteers. Well, if you're fiscally sponsored by Worcester Roots, then you're technically still a nonprofit. If you're not a separate legal entity.
No, it's
Yeah,
just
but
for
if
now
we
though.
were,
Yeah.
But if you were,
then we would no longer have volunteers. I mean, I would just, like, if you want it to be a volunteer thing, then you can just say that you're just get a nonprofit to sponsor it and say, you're sponsoring this event in partnership with, it's Diggers plus Worcester Roots are sponsoring this event, volunteers are welcome. You know,
We have an educational program component to our work.
yeah, like,
Well, and that's the kind of thing that
Focus
might bring
on-
an exception for allowing
Yeah.
volunteers. Like that's what the whole idea is. Just you just don't want volunteers doing the work of what a paid employee would do.
But
It's basically that.
But in summary, you can't have any kind of non-voting apprenticeship that isn't getting paid in real money. Is that right?
Don't know.
Yeah.
Another partnering with nonprofit issue?
Sorry, it's non-voting apprenticeship. Does that mean someone who's not, you don't mean I thought you meant non-voting owner.
Right, the non-voting ownership stuff is confusing, I don't know anything about.
Yeah, okay,
I mean,
sorry,
more
but the
like-
non-voting apprenticeship, yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, right,
I
okay,
mean-
so that's correct.
Right, I mean,
That's what I was
it's
asking.
risky to
Right.
do that.
Yeah, not, if you're clearly not an owner, then you have to be paid in.
That's the
in-
safest
in
bet.
real
If
money
someone's not an
within 2
owner,
weeks.
your safest bet
And,
is
and the
paying
2 weeks
wages.
thing, don't quote me on that, I have to look up what the
Yeah.
statute was,
Right.
but there is a time period.
Yeah.
Like-
No.
like I know,
Like
for
going
example,
to-
Power got grant money
Yeah,
for do apprenticeship for installation, for example,
okay, but
right?
who's getting paid?
You getting paid, but you don't getting paid how much you will get. It's not minimum. It's under the minimum wage, but is a grant money. And you getting it's a stipend. So like but you have to have the like whole nonprofit stuff for
Yeah.
one side to get the money
Separate.
from the government. You have to give certain kind of title or like
Yeah.
the like I don't know, license or something in exchange of that, then have a monetary
Right.
prize, and so it just can't be just you volunteer and I'm teaching you how to break your back.
But they're learning something.
Yeah. Not to do that again.
I mean, you can, but if you ever have a falling out with that person
Right.
can go back
Yes, so you.
and so you've lost wages.
Can I shift gears a little? Still that relationship with the nonprofit a little bit. So Diggers have purchased landscaping equipment. Future Focus has purchased video equipment while under the nonprofit. It's technically owned by the nonprofit. Now when these two co-ops incorporate, how can they continue to have priority use of that equipment or gain ownership of it? Do they have to pay market value? Can they have an agreement to use it?
Yeah, I don't think it's wrong. What we were sort of talking about on the way up with respect to that question is when they were fiscally sponsored by you, that was fine, and now they're just separate. But if they're doing the same thing and the fiscal sponsorship, you felt comfortable that was under your charitable purposes, and helping them, providing resources to them was part of your mission, and the IRS wouldn't have a problem with that. Now that they're incorporated, does that change that thing? Like the way it looks?
We
I
think
think
that
so.
the only way the IRS would look at that and say, whoa, you didn't pay fair market value for this equipment, is if suddenly, Focus went out and was like, we're doing $1 million celebrity portraits now. Like, we don't care about anyone. We're not doing anything that we got this sponsorship for, and we're using this equipment. Maybe there might be an issue. But it seems like if you're doing it under the auspices of this agreement where you're doing it for this purpose, you're getting this equipment for this purpose, and then you continue to use it as a separate entity for that purpose, it's not clear why whatever arrangement you made with your fiscal sponsor to transfer that equipment would be looked at with any kind of scrutiny by the
They're
IRS.
separate.
So they could transfer ownership.
Presumably any way that you would arrange with your fiscal sponsor.
I think we would want to look into that. some more.
Specifics, yeah. Again, we'd be better, we could give better advice if it's a specific, set of circumstances.
I think we're just about out of time.
You can depreciate for 3 years something.
We went up-
Super depreciated.
Yeah.
Get rid of it.
Are you talking about computers in 3 years? I'm not gonna be Yeah. Right. So we're just about out of time. So,
Feel free to email,
yeah,
me
through-
cards, I have links.
Oh, great, yeah.
Questions, stuff.
Can I put your contacts in the notes, Nicola?
Yeah. Or you have my contact.
So next week is our last session of Co-op Academy. Is everybody feeling ready to return loose on the world? Alright, so there's a couple more topics. We're gonna have a big chunk of independent working time in the next session, but there are some more topics that I still want to cover with you guys. Is there anything that anybody's thinking, oh my god, we haven't done this yet, and I was really counting on it? Yes.
I have two things. I guess me and Josie were talking about, one thing we haven't talked about is like financing co-ops and like how we should think about capital or anything. Or maybe it's not
Favorite
that week or we missed that week, but we're both kind of talking about it prior to.
But I think we maybe covered aspects of it, but now that was maybe before we knew what we know now. And now we're going back to that question. Like,
Yeah.
Okay, I would love to cover that with you.
And the other thing I'd love to talk about, like just have some time next time to talk about how we continue to support each other as co-ops and like peer support or whatever way that can look going on.
Awesome, I love that question. Okay. Anybody else have some? Alright, somebody bring cupcakes. I like vanilla. Brownies, no. Brownies are good too. And we'll see you all next week.